All right, we're live. So I'm here with Black Lodge Games. We're going to discuss, that's Matt and Nick, or Ginger Fraser and Young Steve, as they are commonly known across the internet.
Correct.
We're going to be here discussing the Shucked Oyster, which is their Kickstarter. It's going to be a supplement. It is a supplement for Shadow Dark, the 4-time Emmy award-winning tabletop role-playing game. I don't know if I have to say this. Like, generally, I wouldn't call my channel for like for kids, and I know my demographic is like my age. But you know, if you have any kids watching, this is probably not the one. But let's get into it. Let's, you want to introduce yourselves or say where you're from or what you're doing, or I don't know.
So we are based in Austin, Texas. I am Matt, or Ginger Fraser, and this is Nick, who is Young Steve Buscemi, as we have been named by our subscribers, specifically Thraxis. We started this Black Lodge Games journey about a year and a half ago at this point, and have really come, I think, a long way in terms of like YouTube. We had like maybe 200 subscribers when we started, and now got pretty far, which is great. But we have launched recently our very first RPG product, which is the Shucked Oyster, designed for use with Shadow Dark RPG. And it's not your typical module. It is modular, though, which is the key thing. This is not simply a dungeon adventure. It's been just a ton of fun to write this thing, and we're wrapping up on it actually this week, which is great. At least on the the base level thing. We have stretch goals now that we have to write, but it's basically it's a dynamic location you put into your campaign, and it just kind of simmers in the background until your players get interested enough to check it out. There's all sorts of
weird
characters in it. It's definitely a different. There are dungeons, so this is not like a total break with old school gaming. Quite the opposite, in fact. But it's very much more based on all of the weird and bizarre characters that we have running around town, doing different things, different schemes and motivations, and getting involved in these weird conspiracies. And the idea is that this is going to take your game in very different directions. It's not linear. There's no beginning, middle, end to this. It all makes sense and is all coherent, but they're
just things that are happening.
Yeah.
People who are acting in the world, whether you help them, try and stop them, or even if you try and ignore them.
Yeah. Things are
going to happen.
Yeah. So it's kind of meant to pour gasoline on the campaign and light it on fire and see where it goes. Really get away from the railroad thing, get you going in really bizarre directions. And
that's certainly happened in our game and in other people who've been playtesting.
Yeah, we've got a couple of people who've been playtesting it. Lord Mateus did a great write-up on it. It was awesome and gave us some super good feedback. That is all going into the book, by the way. Tora is also running this with his Shadow Dark group, and they've had all sorts of insane things happen. It's kind of his players have rightly become obsessed with the Shucked Oyster. And in terms of our campaign, it has just absolutely taken it to a different place. The game, we have speed run the Adventurer and Conqueror phase, and we're the Adventurer phase of Adventurer Conqueror King.
Right.
And it's now just spiraled out of control, and the world has got much bigger, much faster than I could have possibly anticipated. So it's been mission accomplished. I think.
Oh, for sure. I'm taking a look at the Kickstarter page now. You're at 14,945.
Yeah.
I think the next stretch goal is at 15.
15.
So if anyone out there is listening and hasn't backed it yet, go back it.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you guys want a third dungeon.
Yeah. A third dungeon. So far, we've added an axe compatibility guide that we'll be writing, as well as a wilderness encounter table. So you will not even if you leave town, you won't be able to get away from the Shucked Oyster. It will draw you back in. It's like a black hole. It just keeps drawing you back to it.
It seems like it's almost like the design philosophy behind it was, if I can put words in your mouth for a moment and then slap the taste out of mine if
go for
I get it wrong. But it seems like the design philosophy was to make and I haven't played Shadow Dark yet, so I don't really know the ins and outs of the game, but you go to your dungeon, you collect your loot, you go back to town or whatever to carouse. It seems like you really wanted to make that carousal like central.
Yeah.
Right.
As opposed to the dungeons, which I assume would be mostly central to a game like Shadow Dark, insofar as the core book describes it. You wanted to take it literally in the opposite direction that a typical Shadow Dark game would go.
Yeah, not necessarily in the opposite direction. It was just that was the thing that we found the most interesting, because it's like in a lot of these games, people play kind of unmotivated characters. We're just going to sack the dungeons, and this kind of gives like the world that is painted. If you take that mechanic of carousing and the way that it operates in Shadow Dark, which is pretty clever and very fun, it's like you get all your loot from the dungeon, and then especially at the low levels, because that's where the experience bonus really matters, you go and you just blow it all so you can level up, but then you're broke again, and it's like, okay, I've ruined my life.
Right. What kind of person does this sound like?
Right.
And what kind of people does such a person hang around?
Right.
Gotcha.
And it's weirdos and degenerates and crazy people, and it's so we just, when we hit on that idea, we were like, whoa, that's really cool. It just snowballed and spiraled into this thing. So the thing is, like I said, we have two pretty large dungeons in this as well, and now we'll be adding a third. It's meant to not overshadow that, because the whole thing is that this is not the kind of module that you can like, okay, tonight we're going to play the Shucked Oyster. That's what we're doing for this one night.
Right. We're not trying to take over the game, but if carousing is a thing that matters to your character, and it would, because you're being mechanically incentivized, it's part of the game. It's another half of it's the other half of the dungeon. People do know it's in the DNA of like the gamer mindset, what a dungeon is. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And there's a lot of good resources and tools in the Shadow Dark core book to do that. There's also some very good city and town resources as well. But we wanted to really highlight the area that is most often and is most likely to not get screen time.
Right. Which is your time in town.
Right.
Your time in town, you should not be just treating it as a gas station to fill up on hit points and arrows, and because there's so much more interesting stuff that can happen there. And so hopefully this will make people, well, it's not hopefully, I know this is going to make people's towns way, way weirder and way more interesting than they have been previously. But it's meant to be there as it's like you go out, do dungeons, come back, things are different in town. You get caught up in this. So it's not meant to like hijack the experience of
even
going
if you've
out
never
and
been
delving
there.
Dungeons. Yeah. Even if you've never been there. Yeah.
That may not save you. It definitely won't.
It won't save you. Yeah, but it's meant to kind of just bring a little bit more life to this other part of the game, as opposed to, taking away or changing the direction away from the core thing that Shadow Dark does very, very well.
Because there are deeper things. If your players do get interested, there's a lot of depth should they be interested in pursuing it. But even if that's not the case, you have this huge cast of really interesting NPCs for your players to interact with, for the characters to interact with.
And for the GM to play.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're all doing stuff in the background too, which is, and they're so funny. Like I have never laughed as hard as I have while we were writing this. It was so much fun. But the thing is, they're very funny, but it's like, it's not like, oh, goofy cartoon land. It's like, no, this is a surreal, weird place.
Right.
It is very funny, but we took everything seriously from the perspective of the characters.
Everything is funny from within the world.
Yeah.
There are no fourth wall breaks or lulls so random humor in there or references to anything. This is all wild and crazy things that are happening in a fantasy world, which could and would presumably happen in a fantasy world like this.
I told you, I think it was like last week, I told you that I went and bought all of the Shadow Dark
Yeah.
books and supplements and whatnot so that I could play. And I'm very excited to have my first game, and I'm happy to just sit on it and wait because I know that the delivery of I think the PDF is immediately after the Kickstarter
pretty much
closes.
the baseline PDF that does not have the stretch goals included will be out once the check clears from Kickstarter.
Right.
Yeah, we'll issue the codes for Drive Through RPG.
So in like 23 days, and then plus whatever it is a week, the digital stuff will come out, and I'm very, very excited to have my first Shadow Dark experience include the Oyster. It sounds like it sounds like it's something that you could sort of just revolve an entire game around.
Yes.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen any of the content what you've included in the book, but it sounds like, with so many NPCs and so many things to do, and the 2 dungeons, 3 when you cross the 15K mark, there's just going to be a lot there to do. That's like several sessions worth of content. On top of that, the way that you've been talking about this, and if I'm stepping on toes, then please let me know. But this is a brothel that will be perpetually burned down. So if it's perpetually burned down, it seems like it will then perpetually be rebuilt. And so it's kind of like a fixture in a campaign where you can pay it mind if you want to. You don't have to. You can come back to it regardless of how long the campaign is. It's not just like a one and done sort of situation. There's a bunch of recurring characters, recurring situations.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's really, really fun. I'm really
it's
really
like the kind of, I wouldn't say gimmick, but the
premise.
The premise is that this brothel is prone to disasters, and so it has burned down many times in the past. And when you go there and you carouse, if you get a really high carousing outcome, then it's going to burn down. But it burns down for different reasons every time. And it's like, who's responsible? What actually caused the fire, which could be a whodunit, or it could be an act of God or something, that is determined every time it burns down. And then you also determine, well, who's the town blaming this time? Because this is going to change and they almost never line up. There's probably like
it could happen, but it likely
It's
won't.
very, very rare that they would actually be accused.
And they could blame you, even if you definitely didn't.
Yeah. And they could blame someone else, even if you did. Yeah. And even if you didn't set foot inside the oyster, you could still have burned it down.
Yep.
So there's these linked tables that give you like fresh kind of outcomes and things to work with every time. So it's not just like, it burned down again. It's like, well, no, like maybe the first time it got struck by lightning, but the second time someone started the fire, and the town is going crazy blaming someone, or they might be blaming themselves, which is one of my favorites on that list. But that alone is certain circumstances of things that you do based on the circumstances of the fire is going to affect then how the prostitutes see you. And because we have this thing called the total oyster modifier, where every little thing that you're doing is causing bonuses and penalties to the reaction rolls that you have with the ladies of the oyster. And this changes very quickly. And it changes every time that you carouse. If you had a positive, it goes to negative. If you had a negative, it goes to positive. So the women there are like all over the place, totally mercurial, crazy, nothing like women in real life, and it should make something very interesting every time it happens. And then you have some time while it gets rebuilt again, and then it opens, and then there's many, many, many opportunities for it to burn down, for you to get blamed, for you to have been the cause of the fire, for any number of people to have been behind it, and all the while you're running into these other people who are either patrons of the oyster itself or connected to it in some way.
Right.
And by getting involved with them, you're also causing these modifiers to pile up.
Right. Because there's this this modifier, which is in part trying to model reality in that you don't have just an interesting cast of NPCs. These NPCs are real people within the game world. People remember the reputations and the actions,
right?
Whether it happened 5 seconds ago or in a different scene, an hour ago, or 2 weeks ago, you're getting back from your overland travel or what have you, or the brothel has been burned down. People's minds don't just get wiped. They remember the things that are going on with you, the player characters, and with other NPCs who are detailed in this module.
Yeah, it's like it's a reputation and gossip simulator.
Right.
So like a soap opera.
Yeah.
Exactly.
A little bit, yeah. But one that can get you killed, like a soap opera.
Yes. Or high school, depending on where you go to school.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to kind of go back to something that you had mentioned previously regarding making going back to town important. I kind of share that sort of view to totally talk about myself and yank the mic away for a minute. I have begun developing a game with Jax, who was on last week or 2 weeks ago, something like that.
Nice.
And it started off as, an idea sort of half formed and whatever and whatnot. But the reason that I wanted to develop the game, and there are several games, or at least ideas for games that I have, a lot of what I want to do involves that sort of thought. Like, well, what if X was actually important? Or what if Y was actually important? Kind of structuring the role play around that kind of situation, I guess. I don't really know what to call it. Is it something that just evolved naturally, or is it actually something that you considered in the design process, or how exactly did that emerge? And is it something that you're going to carry forward to other products, or is it just something that happened this way this one time?
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
It's certainly no secret on our channel. We're very much focused on immersive role play. We're focused on characters. The characters are the most important thing. We're certainly up there, and trying to immerse yourself in a world means we do try to take that world seriously. And when it doesn't, add up to, what we would like it to be, what we're trying to, what would you say, trying to accomplish in a game, whether we're playing or running or making a module, that really stands out. So it's not, the idea for the Shucked Oyster, it really did come out of serendipity. We had this video comparing Shadow Dark to OSE, and we realized we didn't really want to do that, but but this thing that we discovered about the carousing and what kind of people are likely to exist in the world that this game is implying exists, that's really interesting. That's very fun. And so naturally and organically, our minds just went to this. Okay, well, if this is true, what else is true?
Yeah.
If that's the case, well, that actually implies this whole other thing, or there's these other types of characters who might exist out there. And, so it was just a naturalistic process, I would say.
Yeah. And I think it also comes back because we've played a lot of very different games. Both of us have played like a lot of Vampire the Masquerade and Requiem, and those are games where it's like it's all about town. You never leave the city. You're not leaving Vampire. You are stuck there for all intents and purposes, and so the game is about something very different. And this is something that we've been critical of, like dungeon crawlers and things in the past, because a lot of people kind of just play them as like a video game almost. Like obviously role-playing games are different than video games, but of like just going into the dungeon casino to get my gold pieces so I can level up, so I can go back, and really not focusing on the characters very much. And it's just kind of that's always going to be our focus, is characters and what is interesting from the perspective of a character. And so that is, I think, kind of contributed to that. It was serendipity that we came up with that. And it just wouldn't go away. You know, it was just stuck in our mind. But it's an area where I think that people who enjoy doing dungeon crawls can get more out of that if they take the character seriously, if they take the world seriously, even if it's a silly world.
And definitely like Shadow Dark has that like flavor to it of like,
it's the thing is, it's like its art is very, in some cases, like grimdark, but it doesn't feel grimdark. It feels like you've got like wizard mishaps, you know, like the spell mishaps and everything like that. Like there's something funny inherently about it, you know, and the way that this is the thing, like when people, like if you see an actor in a movie who's very, very, very funny, they're not hamming it up for a bit when they're acting. When they're acting, they're taking it so seriously as that character, and that's why it's funny,
right?
And so the same thing is if you just like, I want my game to be funny, I want to laugh, and it's like
there's a right way and a wrong way to do that.
Take it seriously, and it'll be so much more funny. It's like, we were talking about this, like, I'm sure you're familiar with the game Paranoia.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a game that is like treated so often as just being for yucks. You know, it's like, oh, it's funny, friend computer, haha. You know, but it's like, no. What if you treated every single one of your clones?
Certainly do.
Yeah. As like, this is life or death, and I have to take this seriously. The computer has given me a secret mission, and I can't reveal this. And I'm going to go through some sort of awful meat grinder. Everyone's going to betray each other. It's way funnier if you take it really seriously.
True.
Yeah. If it was true, if you take it really seriously, you'll laugh a lot more.
And again, like that's why a character immersive focus is that's not tied to a particular genre.
Yeah.
You know, what would your mind may go to drama or something. And sure, of course. That's obviously a big part of drama, but that's part of literally anything. A horror movie, a horror game would not be interesting or horrific if the characters in the world of the horror situation didn't think of this as a life or death situation. Same thing with comedy, as you said.
I agree. Silly thing to say. I mean, I think everyone should agree with that. That sort of a statement.
More people should agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I kind of just lost my thought there. Sorry about that. Is there anything you guys want to bring up that's not like prompted by a question or?
Well, like, I would say this, like, you know, depending on what type of tone, like maybe you are the type of person or you're the type of group who are more interested than we are in sort of the dungeon crawl loop, let's say, which is fine. But like you said, Matt, with this module, hopefully, even for the people who do not totally agree or maybe don't believe that it can be done, or for regardless of your situation, hopefully for more GMs, whether they fully agree or not, even beyond what is offered in the Shucked Oyster itself, which is a ton of content which can last basically
a very
forever.
long time. Yeah.
You know, for the extent of your campaign.
Yeah.
This is sort of a model for how to build a town, build a faction, build a community, build a family, even. You know, anytime there is more than one person in a particular place, there's going to be social dynamics that are in play. And whether you flavor it as character drama, horror, humor, or sort of anything in between, these things are going to come up. This is part of the world. And if you want your game to come alive, to do whatever it is you want to accomplish with it, you should be taking that into account. It's going to make your game better. And you think about it, when people are asked, what's your greatest gaming memory? Usually it's tied to a character or characters.
Yeah.
Those characters, those NPCs they're memorable because they're human beings, quote unquote, like us. And humans are the most interesting thing in the world.
Awesome. So I don't want to be like super awkward and just like sit here and make comments on answers that you're giving and come across as some kind of friggin' weirdo. Do you want to like dive into any other topics? You want to stick?
I want to talk about your evolving gaming RPG, your role playing philosophy.
Yeah,
let's go for it.
Yeah,
let's get into the real meat or bacon,
as it were.
Yeah,
indeed. So, what do you want to know? Do you have questions? Do you want me to just kind of wing it?
Well, you've been thinking about it a lot. You've talked with a bunch of people. Maybe you could like sort of recapitulate where you are right now, and we can have a conversation about it.
It's funny, like it seems to change daily, right? Because I'm really, when I first started this thought process, I was definitely a top-down sort of observer. Like I had an idea what I wanted it to be, and so I was going to make everything fit to that idea.
Right.
It's a very bad way to go about it. And I knew that it was a bad way to go about it, but I don't know, for some reason I couldn't get it out of my head. But the more that I learn, the more a bottom-up approach I think is necessary. So for example, Brownstein has been on everyone's minds recently. I don't know exactly where it came from or why. I know that it was at Gary Con this past year, and I think maybe even Dave Con, and I think Gen Con as well. But everyone is talking about it, and knowing, like, so let me just go slow and get into everything. So Brownstein is something that I knew nothing about. And so I went to do a little bit more investigation on it, discover what it is, discover that it was, Wesley who added the referee role to what was ostensibly a war game, and also, maybe not also, but at least to a more mechanical degree, character roles. And when I say to a mechanical degree, I mean specifically that they had certain options that they could execute on. And you do a little bit of looking, and it turns out that generally speaking, the wider RPG audience will say that it was the addition of that referee that sort of changed it from a war game to a role-playing game, or at least more toward a role-playing game. And Arneson got a hold of it, created Blackmore, started to do, what he, I think, originally called medieval fantasy Brownstein style games. And then from there, Dungeons and Dragons grew out of it. And I think the new pursuit is going to be figuring out how significant does an addition or a subtraction to a game model have to be to create another genre? Like, when does that happen? How big of an impact does the thing that you're adding or subtracting have to be? For example, like there are games out there that have, you go through the iteration of the different generations of role-playing games, as Shauna would put it. And it's, the first generation, second generation, third generation, all the way up to 5, which is Microscope. At least that's the example he gave. So there have been games that have sort of been developing under these different generations along the way. There are third generation games and they've sort of been evolving. But like, what happens when you take a role-playing game that has seen 50 years of input and has, the shoulders of giants on which to stand, and you remove the element that created them, right? There are GM-less games out there. So when you remove the referee, if adding the referee is what created the genre, dependent on public perception and popular consensus, then shouldn't removing that element also have created a new genre? And if it didn't, why?
Well, potentially, because I don't know that it's necessarily the addition of a referee. I think it was just that the role of the referee in role playing games changed a lot, because the old war games generally would have,
Judge.
2 players, and they'd have some sort of a judge or referee. Yeah, but the Braunstein was different for a couple of reasons, because it was no longer, okay, I'm simply the general and I'm commanding the troops. It was supposed to be sort of like the precursor to a wargaming scenario, and bringing it down to everybody's playing a person, a character, and pursuing their own, everybody having their own goals and pursuing them, created this kind of new madness. And I don't know where the line gets drawn, because there are certainly some games that you can point to and say, that's a war game, that's a role-playing game, but there's so much common DNA between them that at times, certain games, it can be much harder to make that distinction. And I think that a lot of the old, like, I know Traveler in particular had like solo play rules, but solo play I don't think has been as popular until very, very recently.
Right.
On the scale of which it is. But that also, I think you're right, that is a different activity in a different game. We've talked about this a couple of times, because I've only done very, very small, like dipped my feet into solo gaming a tiny bit, with like testing rule systems and things like that. But it seems to me to be a very different activity. And I think it was Lord Mateus said that RPGs are team sports, basically. Like it's I'm not sure solo gaming and role-playing gaming are the same thing.
I would say they're definitely not. And I would say, there is tremendous overlap in the RPG space, but it seems to me that the most effective way to categorize these things, because I do believe that, like, the umbrella term of RPG does include too many things which are completely different than what I mean when I say role-playing games, and completely different to what I want to do. In some cases, to such an extent where it is a mutually exclusive activity. This isn't like a sort of a take what you can get or enjoy, this percentage of the activity you want out of the thing.
Right.
But obviously, an explicit war game, it is largely an out of character oppositional competition. We're trying to we're replaying a battle, and maybe the outcome will be different, or even if it's a fictitious battle, let's sort of see what happens. I'm playing the French, you're playing the Prussians, or what have you, and we'll see what happens. And the judge is there to adjudicate, an activity of sort of continual dispute between an actual opposing armies. With the initial Braunstein of the scenario in the university, and sort of how what people are doing with that now, trying to kind of recapture that dynamic. That is something that's certainly interesting. It's more complex than two sides on a battle.
Right.
But it seems to me largely that this also is not by itself per se a role-playing game. If it is the case that, so let's say all three of us are, I'm a faction in this place, Matt, you're a faction, and you are portraying another faction. We're sort of doing a wargaming activity at a more granular level, that is not tied to like rules of engagement on a battlefield. Our factions are not armies meeting on a battlefield. And so the things that we do are going to be different, but this is an exercise in like multi-party competition to establish some kind of a victor or some kind of a win state. That's certainly interesting and not something I've seen talked about until relatively recently, as you say. But that is also very different than wanting to get into the headspace to act, feel, behave like a person in this imagined game space. And we're just following what he and the people around him are doing, whatever it is they are. That's also a very different experience because we have different goals in mind.
Yep.
From the outset.
I completely
like player
agree
goals.
with you. I completely agree with you. But I think that element, insofar as I've been able to determine, was present in Braunstein 1 when Wesley didn't have a whole lot of rigid rules as far as how the individual players could interact with one another. Now, he tried to remediate that in Braunstein 2 and 3. But again, from what I've been able to read or listen to, that didn't go over well because the players wanted to be able to solve their problems however they wanted to be able to get into the role and to solve the problems however they liked. And Wesley wanted to be able to actually be a referee and to be able to prepare himself for the different actions that the players had because he had already figured out what they could be and planned for those contingencies. And so while I definitely agree it is a wholly different activity, it definitely is sort of nebulous with regard to nailing it down. Like good luck, right? Because the players being able to behave in any way they want it to acquire their victory points and compound those over the course of a game, like there's still victory points. So do we need to remove victory points? We need to remove a win-lose condition in order for it to get closer to being a role-playing game. I would argue yes. I don't think
I would agree with you.
Have a
100% agree.
Condition.
I want to mitigate as much artifice as is possible, while still sort of maintaining the ability to create this, imagined space together.
Right, because it is these like mechanical incentives for you to do things. Like I understand why they're in games. They do incentivize players to play in certain ways, but from the perspective of a character, it's like if you're talking like about the carrot and the stick, it's like I am bringing my own carrot. My character has goals. And that is not always. I'm going to make a character compatible with whatever game I'm playing. Like that. Course. I'm not going to, just make something completely alien to the concept of the game itself. But the thing is, it's like I'm not chasing leveling up.
Right.
When I play a role playing game, that's not what I'm doing. That may happen as a result of my actions, but it's like I am pursuing the goals from the perspective of the character. And that is more interesting to me, is way more interesting to me than,
just trying to get more powerful for the sake of getting powerful.
Or just trying to get the point to win the game.
Correct.
Like, because the winning for us is the memories that you're taking away from the table. And the most interesting memories that I take from the table are where my goals come into conflict with someone else's goals and something crazy happens, and it's the result of us taking the character seriously and taking their actions seriously within the world.
Right. And when you focus too much or when you're too aware of mechanical incentives, on the one hand, there's maybe some positive there, in terms of from a consistency factor, or from a completeness of vision perspective. But if you think about this, or if you have games that are developed in a culture that's built up around mechanical incentives being a necessary and good thing in a role-playing game, you will, as we do now, you'll find ourselves in a place where there are fairly uncontroversial archetypes for like problem players, let's say. So, you know, an example would be the guy who is telling a new player or a player who's just trying to role play how they should play their character to optimize, right? So if I'm playing my character in a way that I don't know what levels are, I don't have any awareness of what hit points are, or, you know, these pieces of mechanical artifice, I'm going to find myself in conflict with someone who's taking like the mechanics as sort of the utmost value here.
Right.
And if you don't sort of distinguish what the ultimate goal is, what the ultimate value is in the activity, we are coming at it from equal footing. I'm, you know, no more right or wrong than he is, and I'm just as much of a problem player as this quote unquote like metagamer or power gamer is. Obviously, I disagree with that because I do have a starting value, and I think people should have starting values.
And know what it is they want out of the game.
Right.
I completely agree with that. But I mean, rolling that back into sort of this, you know, exploratory, you know, I don't know what to call it. I guess I'm exploring ideas. I'm exploring, you know, the origins of role-playing games and where they came from and where they've gone, and whether or not new genres have emerged from role-playing itself, or if, you know, everything falls under the same umbrella. I think that there's an article written by, it's the Retired Adventurer, about the 6 cultures of play. I don't agree that there are 6 cultures of play.
I feel like I've seen this, like the traditional or like the I actually forget what the terms are, but I do know what you're talking about.
I did skim it.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, I don't agree that there's 6. There's likely more than that, but you know, at some point, like, something's got to give, right? Like, at some point you change something so much, and I'm kind of just, I apologize. I'm not really linking this up because I'm getting mentally sidetracked, but like, there has to be a point where something has changed so much to a point where it's now no longer the thing that it started as.
I can give you an example of another way, or another kind of thing within the role-playing games that where I think there is a distinction, which is, and I don't mean, when I say story game, I don't mean what idiots call story games, which is, you know, playing a character, being invested in your character's goals and all the things that we like to do, but literal story games, the things that describe themselves as being narrative story games, they're different than role-playing games because they are fundamentally focused on something else. And it is like the Candela Obscura is the one I am most familiar with because I had to read that thing. I didn't have to, but once I started, I couldn't stop.
But not for the reasons you think.
But not for the reasons you think. But it's these are games that really are not about being from the perspective of the character. It's from the perspective of the fiction. And this is a very different thing than what I classify as a role-playing game. They're basically 2 different activities.
Right.
And if you want to do that, that's fine. But it's conflating the 2 things is horrendously damaging, I think, to people.
And I think Like the answer to the question is yes. And for anyone who's thinking about this, even for a minute, I think can see quite clearly that the answer is obviously yes, that there are many things that are categorized as role-playing games, which are at their foundations different. They look different, they feel different, they're trying to accomplish different things. The reason in part why we still have the umbrella term, because I don't think something has to give in the environment that we're in now. And that is, I disagree with, I think that's bad. But the reason in part I think it is the case that this umbrella has just grown bigger and bigger and bigger over the years and the decades and hasn't splintered off into different like identifiable activities or game genres, if you want to call it that, is the primary reason throughout the years, the highest percentage of people, the reason they're playing a role-playing game, regardless of what type of game, a story gaming, a war game, or a role-playing game as I would define it, are doing it is simply to switch their brain off and to socialize. The reason they're here is not for really anything, whether it's a Candela Obscura or a Powered by the Apocalypse story game or a Braunstein factional PvP, competitive enterprise, or an exercise in character immersion. They're here for reasons that are outside of the activity in its entirety.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of what do the most people sort of want to do, or what are the most people temperamentally drawn to in terms of like the game genre. And so long as that is the case, because this role-playing games as an activity, as like a thing, they don't have an audience. It isn't a spectator sport.
Yeah.
Nor is it, and because it's not a spectator sport, it's not a performance either, despite what you'll hear. It is the fact of the matter that we, even with the invention of Critical Role, this isn't something that can be turned into like an exercise of consumption for a spectator. So there's no outside there's no need for like the community of role-playing gamers to really interface with like the external world in a way that's going to like slap them back with obvious feedback or critique that is going to force the fracturing into these things which are clearly different, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point too, that there's no external input on vocabulary or on concepts or anything like that. It's pretty much just what individual table everyone around that table thinks they're doing is role playing, then that becomes role playing. And
it's very isolated. The knowledge sharing between tables is very low, just by the nature of the way the games are played.
Right.
Yeah. So here's a question then. Is any game let's just actually start at the bottom. What's a role-playing game to you guys? Do you have a ready definition for role-playing game, or what role-playing actually is? I know it's a ridiculous ask.
It's not. I don't think so.
No.
Okay, great.
I think a role-playing game. Okay, now it is harder now that I have to actually come up with the definition on the spot. But no, a role-playing game is basically an exercise in imagination where you're putting yourself in the shoes of another person, another character within an imagined world. And we use these gamified rule systems basically to enforce non-arbitrary outcomes within that. So this is not simply an exercise in total make-believe in the way that like children do. It puts parameters and enforces some semblance of an objective reality on the imagined space.
Right.
And role playing is essentially putting yourself into the mindset of another person. It's like Sir Ian McKellen says, I pretend to be that. I wonder what that person would do, and then I do it.
Right.
And trying to actually play a different character under imagined circumstances where there are essentially objective ways of resolving conflict, of deciding the outcomes of uncertainty and things like that.
Right.
But the game part of it, to me, this is where, we kind of, are these even games? We're not sure.
Yeah, I've kind of started calling it an activity because I don't know if game is appropriate or not. It's, I'll use the colloquialism. It's common language used commonly, so I'll call it a game. But I don't know if that really
play.
Yeah,
right. It's a form of play,
but it's not a game in the sense that like basketball is a game,
correct?
Or poker or something like that. It's not.
Right.
That's not what it is. It's something much bigger than that.
So then, is it possible that, and these aren't things that I agree with or disagree with. It's sort of just probing questions. This is sort of the process that I'm kind of going under myself. And so would it be true to assume then that any type of activity that includes the definition that you just provided of role play could be qualified as a role-playing game, or is there something more specific that it has to accomplish? Like, does the role-playing have to be the focus, or because you can, I can play a role while playing Candyland. You know what I mean? Like, give me my piece. I can imagine a role for myself and play a role in Candyland. No. So does it have to be, is it any activity that includes it, or does it have to be sort of specifically called out within the logic and the mechanics of the game component? How would you, I mean, the way that I kind of handle that is say, well, if all then none. Like, if everything's a role-playing game, then nothing's a role-playing game. So you kind of have to really focus down on what you mean.
I would say it has to be the focus.
Yeah. And
because you're right. It's like there are games which are more in the storytelling game camp, or more in the mechanical incentive, like I can role play a character in an active in Candela Obscura or in Powered by the Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not only are the game mechanics fighting me, I'm also fighting the general conception of what we're trying to do here. But you're right. It's like I can invent a role-playing game based on like badminton rules where you can get super,
but you're not role-playing in that. You could put yourself into character, but if I'm playing Candyland, I don't have a choice in what my character does. No. I roll the dice.
You're right.
And I have to do, this is a sequence of mechanical operations.
Yes.
Unless you want to be the jerk at the table, but yeah.
Right.
Again, to jury rig Candyland, I have to, it's like, can I take the mechanics and autistically invent my own rules that only I know, that are not written down anywhere for me to like get into the mind of a character? Yes, I'm clearly not playing Candyland, right? So it has to focus on what it is, on that character immersion.
And role playing, it implies choice from the perspective of the character.
Yes.
It's not simply a choice between, do I want to use this set of mechanics or this set of mechanics? It's, does the character
allow for agency?
Yeah, allow for agency of both the player controlling the character, but of the agency of the character within the imagined world. Because this is one thing where like a lot of people talk about player agency being like the most important thing, and it's really not.
No,
it's character
agency. Yes,
I agree with that. I
think
is
character agency.
I think that player agency and character agency are two different things, and I think that depending on the style of the experience that you want at the table will depend on how limiting to one or the other that you're going to be. So if you want a horror game, for example, in my view, at least currently as it stands, I think that it's okay to infringe on character agency a little bit, because that's what's going to be what generates the horror, right? A lot of times in a horror situation, it's that loss of control that creates the fear. And so in order to properly nail that down and get that into the game, you kind of sort of have to infringe on character agency. And there's a whole conversation we could have about whether or not that's the correct way to do it. It might not be. It's just that in currently as it stands, in my view, I think that would be probably the most effective way to handle horror, is to sort of limit that character agency. But I agree with you that they're two different things, and I do agree that character agency is the most important.
Yeah.
And
I would also say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's sort of highlighted by the horror example, because character agency is so important. That's the thing that you limit to get to the experience that you're trying to achieve.
Correct. So a horror situation, I would say, because I agree with you, but I don't think that like impediment of character agency needs to be like an artificial construct for like genre representation, right? To create a horror game, a horror role-playing game, you need not have a mechanic in there that sort of says you can't act arbitrarily because of something that is purely mechanical.
Sure, I agree with that.
If like the monster shows up, and naturally by virtue of us living in a physical reality, my agency is impeded in the same way if I'm in the real world and someone pulls a gun on me, right? Or I'm in a car accident and I have,
someone pulls a gun on you. No.
And someone pulls a gun on me after, or I'm paralyzed by virtue of injury. These are just repercussions of reality.
Yeah.
Because our reality is us trying to, establish and act upon our own agency and free will, but there's other people and there's the physical world that are giving ever-changing constraints.
Yeah,
that's just the way the world works. I would say something like Powered by the Apocalypse, it would not be a role-playing game because, again, we're trying to tell a horror story, or we're trying to imagine a horror movie in an imagined space where there are genre tropes that are so codified and the volume on them are so amplified that these are like instantiated mechanics,
right?
Simply because that's what a horror story is. We must do that now, not because, well, it naturally turned out that way because of the events that took place in a scene.
Yeah, and that's the more interesting thing about having real character agency in a role-playing game, is that you can find yourself in a new genre because of your choices or because of the circumstances of the world. The things can turn into horror stories, and this is the big thing, because I get really, because I used to call these games storytelling games, and a lot of that is because I used to play a lot of the White Wolf games and Vampire. It's like, you're the GM, you're actually the storyteller, and it's really hard for people to let go of story language, story as the way of understanding what happened in the game. And I think the reason for that is because as humans, we understand the past in terms of stories. Everything is always, we are recounting the events. We are making sense of something in this, we're linking the events in a meaningful way. And that isn't what you're doing when you're role playing, because that's also not what you're doing right now, day to day. It's like right now, you and I are not telling the story of Black Lodge Games talking to Bacon.
Exactly. Yes.
We're having the conversation.
Yep.
20 minutes from now, an hour from now, I can tell the story of how I went on your show and we had a conversation.
Yes.
But right now, that's not what we're doing. We are having a conversation and we are acting in the world under conditions of uncertainty. We don't know where things are going to go, and we can't. And so while you're role playing, you're not storytelling. If you are role playing, if you're taking on the mindset of another character in an imagined world, and there is uncertainty and there are choices to make, you're not telling a story. You will have a story afterwards. This is, a lot of the OSR people get this right, is that it's story now versus story later, or versus story after. And it's like afterwards, you will have a story. It will have a coherent beginning, middle, and end. Everything will have happened in a logical sequence because you made choices and you do this. They're 100% right about that. And but using the language of storytelling and of literature in particular, or of even film, to describe what it is you're doing in the game while you're playing, and then basing mechanics off of that, I think is just a travesty. It's a really, really, because it's setting up your brain to think of this in terms of, I need to make a satisfying story. I need to make a satisfying, something that could be written into a book, or I want this to be a movie. I want the beginning, the middle, the end. And you're just going to end up destroying the agency part of it by trying to kind of force that thing. And just the entire lens of the truly story game people, the truly narrativist people, I think makes for a very, very poor role-playing experience and very bad rules for role-playing. Now, if they want to say, yeah, we are just story gamers, we're doing something different, that's fine. Like, that's cool. It might even be fun to do that,
Sure.
Like it could, but this is when it comes to what I want out of the activity of role playing, it is not that at all.
But I would say this as well. So take like the the storytelling game example from their perspective. Again, let's give the devil his due, and it's like, if you want to do that, let's imagine what would be the best way to communally tell a story that has rising action, climax, falling action. It conforms with genre tropes and genre themes, all the full nine.
I'm going to be a smartass and say Google Docs, but
well, yeah, write a book. But much of the mechanical framework for the overwhelming majority of this entire umbrella of role-playing games, the common denominator in 99% of cases is the existence of dice rolls. And dice rolls are, nobody knows what result the die is going to come up on, right? So if you're playing what everybody calls a role-playing game for the purposes of telling a story, even if you all want to do that, you've all agreed to do that. I know what wargaming is. I know what OSR gaming is. I know what all these things are. I want to do this. I want to tell a story. Even if you want to self-censor yourself to act in accordance with like a genre archetype, everyone is going to be dissatisfied because things are happening in the moment and they're adjudicated in large part by uncertain outcomes.
Random number generators. Yeah.
So if you want to do that, you really should not be using dice, or you should be using dice in a different way. I would say like a game that sort of has like a foot in the role play pool and a foot in the storytelling game pool that would be far more effective if you wanted to go full story gaming is Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars or the Genesis system, which is their more broad application of their narrative dice system, because in that game you do not have numerical values on the various dice you're rolling, and they don't conform to like a difficulty value per se. You have although you still have uncertain outcomes because you have successes and you have failures. However, you also have these sort of storytelling flavor prompts as die results. You have triumph and despair and advantage and disadvantage. I think there are a couple others, but I can't recall them at the moment. So in the moment when you're playing this game, you're determining whether the action was successful or not. And you're also narrating the events that took place that are prompted by these sort of directorial notes that you're getting from the GM. It's still, I think, firmly in both camps somehow, but you can't have uncertain results if you're trying to tell a story. That's why you can write a good book. That's why you can tell a good movie,
Right.
or make a good movie, I should say. You really, like, definitionally, you can't tell a story in a role-playing game in the same way that you can't write a good book by making a movie. You know what I mean? You can adapt the story in a book to a movie, and it can be a good book or a good movie, but yeah, you can't make a movie by writing a book or vice versa, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. You have to actually come from film. You have to use the strengths of the medium that you want to tell your story in. And, you know, books are not visual, but they're omniscient, and film is visual, but it's not omniscient.
Right.
And those are just two differences, but they're very, very key integral differences. So if you have, you know, a third person omniscient book that you've written, it's not an easy thing to convert that into a film, because you just have to approach it completely differently, which is why people complain, oh, the movie's not like the book. Well, it's never going to be.
It can't be.
Yeah, it can't
be
be
like the book. Yeah.
It's like it really is
The painting's not like the music.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah. What?
What a stupid thing you just said.
Yeah. Anyhow, we do got to get going.
Yep, it's been an hour
dark here, and I got to get my dog out.
I appreciate the conversation. Thank you guys very much.
Awesome.
It has been. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime in the future.
Yeah,
we love to.
Happy to do it again, man.
Yeah.
Everyone, go out and back the Shucked Oyster, please.
Yeah, please.
Please
just
do.
About ready to
back
cross
bacon, sub to bacon,
sub to bacon gaming.
Also to Black Lodge Games. I appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to end the stream, but be warned, it's not going to end immediately because it never does. So don't say anything.
Oh yeah, no, we do that thing where we stare.
Yep.
Ominously into the camera.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everyone for showing up. I'm going to end the stream now, and I guess we'll just stare for a second.